The Mediterranean world during the Bronze Age was not merely a tapestry of emerging civilizations, it was a crucible where the earliest fires of empire, warfare, and human ambition burned brightly. This was a world before written history as we know it, yet rich in myth, relics, and monumental ruins. The Aegean, shimmering like broken glass under the Mediterranean sun, was both a barrier and a bridgy liquid highway that carried obsidian from Melos, tin and copper from afar, and ideas that would change everything. These warlords were often in conflict with each other and engaged in constant competition over resources, prestige, and maritime dominance. The seas that once connected cultures now became blood-stained arenas for naval skirmishes and piracy. The famous Battle of Troy, whether myth or reality, encapsulates this era world where Mycenaean kings could band together for war, sail 1,000 ships, and wage a siege that would become immortalized in Homer's Iliad. This was the late Helladic period, a golden age of warriors, fortified cities, and international diplomacy. The Mycenaean palaces Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns were destroyed by fire. Linear B script vanished. Populations plummeted. Trade routes crumbled. This was the infamous Bronze Age collapse, a dark age whose causes are still debated. Some argue for internal revolts by the lower classes or slaves. Linear B tablets, frozen bureaucratic moments that give us glimpses into palace economies, lists of armor and weapons, even offerings to gods. However, unlike the Egyptians who fought from the chariot with archers, Mycenaeans often used chariots to deliver heavily armored warriors into combat, where they would dismount and fight with spears and swords. Their armor was sophisticated bronze corselets, bore tusk helmets, and large body shields. Its echoes resound in the architecture we admire, the stories we tell, and the wars we still study, and we've only just begun to uncover it. It teaches us that history isn't static, it's forged in blood, stone, and memory. From the ashes of collapse rose the seeds of classical Greece, but the foundations were laid by those who came before, by kings in golden masks, dancers in palaces, and warriors who stood atop walls watching the horizon for sails. Warriors trained for close-quarter fighting, and palatial centers kept detailed inventories of weapons. The battlefield was ritualistic, elite-driven, and brutal. Battles weren't just for defense. They were about dominance, tribute, and prestige. And the memory of this world lived on not just in ruins but in legend. Homer, writing centuries later, would draw on fading memories of this time, shaping the heroes of Achilles, Agamemnon, Odysseus. In his epics, we find echoes of real armor, real cities, and real wars. Others blame climate change, famine, or earthquakes. And then there's the specter of invasion, the Sea Peoples. A mysterious coalition of naval raiders appear in Egyptian records as devastating coastal cities across the eastern Mediterranean. Defeat meant more than death. It meant disorder, the unraveling of cosmic balance. Linear B archives and storerooms stocked with oil and weapons paints a picture of a society both lavish and militarized. At Tiryns, the massive cyclopean walls defy explanation. Even now, how did Bronze Age engineers move stones weighing several tons? And in Crete, recent digs continue to revise our understanding of the Minoan-Mycenaean power dynamic. And so, warfare in the Bronze Age wasn't just strategic, it was existential. The collapse of palaces might not have ended war, but it changed its scale. In this transition from bronze to iron redefined what it meant to be a warrior in the Greek world. Some scholars believe the Mycenaeans themselves may have been part of this desperate migratory wave. Their warriors now mercenaries without a home. In the archives of the Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greeks are referred to as the Ahiawa, term scholars link to the Achaeans of Homeric legend. These records speak of political tensions, treaties, and even wars between the Hittites and the Mycenaeans. One particularly revealing tablet from the Hittite capital Hattusa describes a king of Ahiawa backing a rebellion in western Anatolia. Another mentions a conflict over the city of Wailusa, believed by many to be Troy. These are not just legends, these are fragments of a real, interconnected Bronze Age world teetering on the edge of chaos. But beyond myth, archaeological evidence suggests that cities were burned, populations displaced, and complex alliances formed through violence and necessity. In Crete An island blessed with fertile plains and natural harbors, a unique culture began to flourish. Weapons became cruder, settlements more isolated, and raids more frequent. The artistry of bronze daggers gave way to brutal iron swords. The glorious age of chariot warfare, of coordinated armies and warrior elites, gave way to small tribal skirmishes and survivalism. But this was not the end. It was a transformation. Because from this collapse would rise a new era, the Greek Dark Ages, a time of oral tradition, migration, and eventually, birth. After a mysterious catastrophe, possibly a massive volcanic eruption on Thera and subsequent tsunamis though, Minoan palaces were devastated, and Crete fell under Mycenaean control. We've only scratched the surface of the Bronze Age Greek world, and there's so much more to uncover. So if you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe to Vertex of Time, your gateway into the most mind-blowing eras of human history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a single tale of war, wonder, and forgotten glory. Now let's dive even deeper. This marked a significant turning point. Mycenaeans didn't just inherit trade routes, they inherited influence. The fusion of these two cultures created a powerful hybrid civilization. Artifacts reveal that Mycenaean pottery and weapons were found across the eastern Mediterranean from Egypt to the Levant. In fact, in Egyptian tombs, we find depictions of sea peoples that resemble Mycenaean warriors, suggesting a far-reaching presence and participation in broader international conflicts. These were the Minoans, a people so advanced that some archaeologists have called them the first true European civilization. Palaces, especially the grand complex of Knossos, were feats of engineering, adorned with colorful frescoes of dolphins, bulls, and dancers. Unlike their later Mycenaean counterparts, the Minoans left no epic tales of conquest. Their power was economic, spiritual, and maritime. And right at the center of this world stood a land known as Hellas, the ancient Greek world before Greece. Excavations led by Heinrich Schliemann at Mycenae unearthed golden masks, including the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, and warrior graves filled with bronze swords, boar tusk helmets, and evidence of a warrior elite. This was a culture obsessed with power, expansion, and military glory. Their palaces, like those at Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae itself, were fortresses as much as royal seats. Crowned with cyclopean walls and commanding views, they spoke an early form of Greek, and their bureaucrats kept records on linear B tablets, the earliest known form of Greek writing. Unlike the peaceful art of the Minoans, Mycenaean frescoes often depicted hunting, chariots, and battle. It was a fragmented collection of palatial centers, fortified citadels, seafaring traders, and warriors whose stories would echo into Homer's epics and beyond. Today, we journey deep into the forgotten warriors and lost kingdoms of Bronze Age Greece, exploring the rise and fall of the Mycenaeans, the shadowy influence of the Minoans, and the brutal realities of Bronze Age warfare. This is not mythology, this is archaeology, history, and raw power. And it all begins over 5,000 years ago with a question. What if the legends of Troy, of kings in golden masks, and palaces eaten by fire, were all true? At the dawn of the Bronze Age, around 3200 BC, the Greek mainland was a land of tribes and scattered agricultural settlements. The sea dictated life. Meanwhile, on the Greek mainland, something darker stirred. By 1600 BC, the Mycenaeans rose from the shadows, and battle was frequent. The Mycenaean world was fragmented into small kingdoms, each ruled by a Wainaxa king who wielded both religious and military authority. By the 15th century BC, the Mycenaeans had absorbed much of Minoan culture. At this point in the journey, if you're fascinated by the power struggles, archaeology, and epic battles of ancient civilizations, you're exactly where you need to be. The height of Mycenaean power came between 1400 and 1200 BC, and chaos would come. Around 1200 BC, a cataclysmic series of collapses devastated nearly every major Bronze Age civilization. But the warfare of this era is undeniable. As the palatial systems crumbled, so too did the delicate balance of power. And yet, even in ruin, the Bronze Age Greek world left behind treasures graves like those at Grave Circle A, in Mycenae laden with gold, the Lion Gate, still defiant after 3,000 years, Let's talk tactics and battle for a moment. Mycenaean warfare was marked by the elite use of chariots, particularly in flat plains like those near Thebes and Pylos. When a Mycenaean warlord marched to battle, he didn't just represent a kingdom, he embodied the divine order, the will of the gods. Today, archaeologists are still unearthing secrets. Pylos's Palace of Nestor, with its central hearth and throne room. What remains is awe. The Bronze Age Greek world was a civilization born of fire, myth, and relentless ambition. So now you know. Beneath the myths, the Greek Bronze Age was a real, bloody, magnificent world,